Just within the last 24 hours, Hamas threatened to blow up the ceasefire agreement. Trump, in turn, gave them a deadline, set an ultimatum for them to release all the hostages, and then threatened Egypt and Jordan if they wouldn't receive the Gazans. And the plight of the Israeli hostages that had dominated headlines for 2 days was out of the headlines again. Welcome back to All Israel Updates. I'm Hanan Lischinsky, and today, once again, I'll try to give an overview and try to help you make sense of what's going on. There's been multiple stories within a 24 hours window, one report after the next. Things are changing very fast. And even as we're filming this, the Israeli government, the cabinet, is actually meeting just several kilometers from here in Jerusalem to determine how Israel will respond to all of this. So I hope that by the time that you see this, things won't have shifted once again. But for now, we'll try to make sense, give an overview of what has happened and what's going on with the Gaza war, with the ceasefire, the hostage deal, and the Israeli hostages that are still in captivity. On Monday evening, Hamas announced it would suspend the coming round of hostage releases that was planned for next Saturday, citing several alleged violations of the ceasefire agreements by Israel. Now, this agreement, this statement came just after Israel pulled out its troops out of the Netzarim corridor, which was one of the main IDF posts. This was a corridor several kilometers broad, cutting across the Gaza Strip and dividing its northern part from the rest of the Gaza Strip. So just after Israel pulled out its troops, Hamas announced that the ceasefire agreement, the hostage deal, would be halted for now. And in response, Israel announced it would raise the alert, put the IDF troops on higher alert, but until now has not officially responded to this. And as I mentioned earlier, the cabinet is still meeting and still deliberating on how to respond. However, a very strong response would come just several hours later when US President Trump was talking to reporters, and he, out of the blue, once again surprising everyone, just put an ultimatum in front of Hamas. He said, as far as he's concerned, they have until Saturday until Saturday noon to release not just the hostages that were planned for release next weekend, but all of them. So in effect, canceling the ceasefire and the hostage deal agreement. And he just gave Hamas until Saturday, as I said, to release all the hostages. Now, it's important to remember that the US really isn't party to this agreement. It was a mediator, maybe the most important mediator in bringing this agreement into being, but it's not a party. So as I mentioned earlier, the Israeli government until now hasn't responded, and we don't know at the time of this filming how Israel will respond to it, and whether Israel will in fact endorse this ultimatum and for its part also give Hamas until Saturday to release all the hostages, which again would be a breach of the agreement that was mainly negotiated by the Biden administration. So it's possible that Trump really doesn't see himself as being tied to this agreement, and we'll see what the Israeli government will decide. And because one major Trump headline isn't enough, just several minutes later, within the same discussion with reporters, Trump brought his major second headline of the day when he said that Jordan and Egypt, who refused to take in Gazans — remember, Trump's plan is to evacuate most, if not all, Gazans until maybe the reconstruction is finished or even temporarily. But he said, he threatened that the US could even cut aid if the Jordanian and Egyptian leaders will not agree to his plan. However, he reiterated that basically said, of course, the leaders have a heart and the other nations have a heart, and therefore they will agree in the end. Now, the question is, of course, what all of this means for the continuation of the Gaza war, of the ceasefire. And let's just walk through where we are at the moment. So the Gaza war, which started, of course, on October 7 when Hamas invaded Israel, massacred 1,200 people, has continued until last month when Israel and Hamas agreed on a ceasefire. And the first part of the ceasefire was supposed to be carried out in several stages. So there were three stages that were being talked about. We are now still in the first stage, which was supposed to last for 42 days. But after the 16th day of this agreement, so we are already past that, the 16th day was last week. And after the 16th day, the negotiations were supposed to start over the second phase of this agreement. Now, the first phase basically was all that we saw until now. Hamas was supposed to release hostages. Israel, in exchange, released Palestinian prisoners, many of them convicted terrorists and murderers. And Israel also, as I mentioned, pulled out of the Netzarim corridor. Israel also agreed to open the Rafah border crossing in a limited way to enable wounded people, including Hamas terrorists, to exit to Egypt to receive treatment. So now we are in this phase where the second phase of the agreement is being talked about. There was an Israeli delegation that was sent to Qatar to continue the talks, to advance the negotiations. However, Israeli media reported that this team didn't really receive a large mandate. So it was a lower-ranking, working-level team that only talked about the technical details of the current agreement and didn't really advance the negotiations toward a second phase. So the first phase of the ceasefire is what we see now. As I mentioned, the second phase would lead directly to the end of the war while Hamas is still in power. Now, if we look at Trump's Gaza plans, the plans for the evacuation of roughly 2 million Palestinians, it's important to understand that this would be part, basically, of the phase 2 and 3. And this, if it would come to be, if there would really be a large-scale evacuation of Gazans from the Gaza Strip, this would be the horror scenario, the worst possible scenario for Hamas. So this is something they try to avoid. And this might be part of the reasoning why yesterday, on Monday, they threatened to blow up the whole deal unless Israel stopped its alleged violations of the agreement, which from the Israeli side, we are hearing that there were no such violations, and everything that Israel did, for example, open fire on Gazans approaching the border, was part of the terms stipulated under the agreement. So Israel, of course, has the right to defend the Gaza border under the ceasefire agreement. So it seems that Hamas's goal at the moment is not to truly blow up the deal. Many Israeli experts that I've read on this topic to see what the current reaction is, what most Israeli experts think, it seems that most people here in Israel think that Hamas is flipping the table, so to speak, using a Hebrew expression also. But Hamas doesn't really want to walk away from the table, doesn't want to leave the negotiations. This seems to be a move designed to pressure the US to not carry out this evacuation plan, while also putting more pressure on Israel to publicly commit to continue to a second phase, which would be a victory. It's important to say that, yes, the Israeli government agreed to this ceasefire deal that includes a second stage, but the details of the second stage were supposed to be negotiated later, which is now. And most observers here in Israel were pretty sure that the Israeli government on paper agreed to this deal, but in the back of its head never really intended to carry out this second phase, because this would in effect be a clear victory for Hamas. This is what it wants, to continue to come out of this war in existence, in control of Gaza, as we saw during the hostage release ceremonies. This was clearly designed to show that Hamas still rules over the Gaza Strip and will do so after the war is ended. While most people always suspected that the Israeli government wouldn't go through with the second phase of the deal, on the other hand, most observers were sure that Hamas would pull something out of its hat. For example, this kind of the kind of threats that we're seeing now, in order to force Israel to publicly commit to a second phase, even before the first phase was over. Because if Hamas would go through until the end of this first phase and release all of the hostages that it is planned to release, as well as some of the bodies of murdered hostages, then of course it would give all of its cards away. It would lose all of its negotiating chips without gaining anything in return, and Israel could go back to the war. On the other side, this is somewhat like what we are seeing now, where Israel lost its negotiation chips of the Netzarim corridor, as I mentioned. It opened the Rafah border crossing, as I mentioned. It released all of the Palestinian terrorists. Hundreds of Palestinian terrorists were released until now, and some of them within walking distance or within a bus ride from where we are standing here near Jerusalem. So this was always a kind of game between Hamas and Israel, and Hamas has now made its most significant move until now, and we really have to see what the Israeli reaction will be and what the Israeli government will decide will be its next counter move to counter this Hamas advance. So for now, things really hang in the balance. We don't know if Israel will endorse this deadline. It seems like the Israeli government was prepared to return to war, but was it prepared to already now to return to war so soon? Just when it released some of the reservists, some of them finally got their much-needed rest. The Israeli economy is impacted, the army is tired, and we don't know if the Israeli government was really prepared for this move, as I called it earlier, from Hamas. But just to round out my argument that this is a Hamas move and that Hamas is strategically thinking about all of this, it's also crucial to remember that Hamas really hates Israel. There was an anecdote I read from a journalist who asked one of the most important experts in Arabic affairs here in Israel on why Hamas does this and that. And the answer was they hate Israel. And sometimes it's that simple. The pain and suffering that the hostage families are going through now, all of the people here in Israel that want to see the hostages returned are of course deeply troubled. They're afraid that the hostages might never return, that they might be murdered in captivity now. And this of course is not just a tool, but it's part of the goal itself. This is what Hamas wants. And the pain and suffering of all of the Israelis is a victory in itself for Hamas, and it raises its prestige and its legitimacy across the whole region and for all the people that hate Israel. So as I mentioned several times, the government is meeting as we're filming this. Return here, return to our YouTube channel, to allisrael.com to continue to receive the latest updates, find out how this story turned out in the end, and continue to follow us for more news on Israel and the whole region.